Hey, Walker. Why is El Salvador a great place to live?
I could go on and on about this, but you do not want to hear from me. Instead, we have Jeremy from Escape to El Salvador. Now, he's been working really hard to help bring people from around the world to El Salvador, to relocate here.
Jeremy is going to go through with you how to establish residency and how to start your Bitcoin journey in El Salvador. So please give Jeremy a very warm welcome.
Around the world, there are 65 million people alive today that have been forced to flee their homes to escape war, organized violence, and persecution. To give you a sense of perspective, that is the entire population of France. Another 50 million people would join them if they could, but their freedom of movement has been restricted. They are slaves. You may not be aware of this, but there are more people living in a state of actual slavery today than at any other point in human history. And that number is trending up. It's grown 20% in the last 10 years alone. And for the first time, the biggest offenders are the carceral states. In addition to those poor souls, another 200 million or so people are currently moving out of sheer economic necessity. There's no opportunity where they are, no money, so they have to move or starve. The majority of these people are what the United Nations refers to as internally displaced persons. It's a rather clinical term, but it means someone who has had to flee their home, but not necessarily their country of origin. But the rest, a sizable percentage, have actually crossed a border. And when they did that, something magical happened. They became known by a simpler and more easily recognizable and emotionally charged name, because we call them refugees. When I use the word refugee, you probably have a mental image of what the person looks like. It's perfectly natural. If you are from a so-called developed Western nation, you probably imagine a skinny female with a headscarf from a country in Africa or the Middle East, dragging along a few wretched children, desperately fleeing from terror and hoping for a safe place to rest and settle. And that person obviously exists, but the truth is that refugees have many faces. When I consider the term, I also think of that lady, but I can't help but also be reminded of the millions of people who, a few hundred years ago and from all parts of the globe, sought the promise of a new life on the shores of the New World. Because they fled from religious and political persecution, from high taxes, but perhaps most importantly, from a socio-economic system where upward mobility was simply a dream. And their children's children's children would come to call it the American dream. The refugee that you probably imagined at the beginning was fleeing from war and violence in the form of actual bullets from actual guns. But as we've heard so many times today already, economic war and economic violence, well, they can kill just as easily, if a little more slowly. And while the laws of most countries won't recognize these lowly economic concerns as rising to the level required for refugee status, I have to be honest with you. In all of my travels, that is a distinction I've never seen written on a tombstone. Regardless, as you might imagine, the life of the refugee is not a life of privilege. It is a life of circumstance and hard choices. But essentially, it is a life characterized by fleeing from violence, of which there are many types. You may be thinking, why am I telling you all of this? We're at a Bitcoin conference and I'm lecturing about refugees. I would only ask for your patience a little longer. I promise you it all comes to bear. Because I'm suggesting to you that today, in this day and age, it seems more than a little irresponsible to not consider whether at some point in the future, maybe the near future, you and I may become refugees. I'm suggesting that the face that we ought to imagine is actually our own. Because it is more clear today than perhaps it ever has been that most of the governments of the world have quite simply gone mad, schizophrenic really, pulled in so many different directions that they no longer have a coherent personality. They lash out irrationally, violently, with no reason. And it's no surprise that because of that, more and more people are starting to peek over the fence, see if the grass is a little greener on the other side. Admit it. If you came here from another country, isn't that at least a small part of the reason why you're here in this audience? You want to check the color of El Salvador's grass. I assure you it's quite green. And I don't blame you. Obviously, I'm here. And who could really blame you? When you have to live in a world where you endure the constant threat of another lockdown, and you know as well as I do that it'll happen again. And the new lockdowns won't be like the ones that we had a few years ago. The new ones will be intelligently designed. In fact, they might even be marketed as smart lockdowns, because there'll be certain restrictions, but you'll be able to leave your house, of course. You'll need to go to work, run errands. But you might not be able to choose what time of day you use your electricity. No peak hour usage for you. And you might not be able to choose how much gas you use to heat your home or cook your food. And it's not just the lockdowns, those are scary enough. But there's another thing that most of us in this community are hyper aware of, and that's the fact that in most countries around the world, there are advanced plans. And in many countries, there are actual rollouts, including today apparently in the United States, of central bank digital currencies that are specifically designed to strip away the last vestiges of financial privacy that you thought you had. There wasn't a lot left, but soon it will completely vanish. And really, when we think about it, it's not just your financial privacy. It's really fundamentally your financial autonomy, your ability to decide how you spend your money, because that will go first, I assure you. And let's take it a step further, because it's not just your financial autonomy, it's also your bodily autonomy. And even though many of you know better, you will probably wrap up this conference and go get on a plane and go back to a country where your freedom of choice regarding which medical procedures you will have and which medical procedures you won't have, and quite possibly even what kind of food and medicine you can buy at the market, can be approved or denied by some faceless bureaucrat. Or worse, an unyielding computer algorithm. Because at least you can bribe the bureaucrat, right? And that's not even addressing the elephant in the room, the one lever that we could possibly pull to make things a little better, because censorship and the control of the narrative on every media platform, broadcast and social, is omnipresent. And despite the recent turn of events at Twitter, we all know that it'll eventually return to that status quo, because decentralization actually is that important. And believe me when I tell you, as long as there is a neck, it will be choked. So let's recap, shall we? Pretty soon you won't be able to leave your home without a hall pass. You won't really be able to control how you earn your money or where you spend it. And by the way, more of that money is going to be taken from you and given to corrupt politicians or businesses or psychotic companies that build weapons of mass destruction that kill innocent people. And let's face it, your body, the bodies of your family members are at this point essentially walking laboratories in service of Big Pharma. And if you dare to complain about this state of affairs, if you dare to question the official narrative, you can and will be wiped from the internet and the global financial system at the push of a button. Well, that's a whole lot of violence. A whole lot of violence directed at you that you will eventually have to flee from like a refugee. Individually, any one of these trends could have a chilling effect on your behavior. They certainly have on mine. But when considered together, don't they seem like a recipe for the rise of an authoritarian superstate? Folks, this isn't tinfoil hat territory. You don't have to be a science fiction writer or some dystopian futurist to imagine exactly how terrible life would be in that system. And I know I've painted a pretty grim picture of our immediate future, and there are many reasons to be concerned about the direction our society is headed. And honestly, I'm sorry, because I don't mean to be so macabre about it. Ironically, I'm on the stage to give you a vision of a brighter future. A brighter future because I believe, in my heart of hearts, that not all hope is lost. Because while all of those other countries are restricting your freedoms, El Salvador is expanding them. While those other countries are devising clever ways to extract more wealth from their citizens, either directly through aggressive taxation or indirectly through currency debasement, El Salvador has committed to and begun to roll out a more freedom-oriented, Bitcoin-centered policy designed to enrich its citizens. Imagine that. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. There's no question about it. But the important part is that the work is being done. Look around you. The work is being done while elsewhere politicians no longer even give lip service to these ideas. In fact, the current business and government community has moved this entire country toward a future of liberty and virtuous growth at a time when governments around the world are publicly saying the exact opposite: degrowth. That's just insanity. You don't have to wonder who is on your side. It's all out in the open. Now, I should probably give a caveat here before I'm labeled a zealot, because I'm obviously optimistic about El Salvador. That's why I'm here. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I am on this stage in an attempt to persuade you. And it's true that I cannot tell the future or predict what path any one particular country may follow. But that's exactly my point. That's exactly why you need to have more than one country for the place you call home. Today, that's what I want to talk about. Legal residency is like a single country multipass. In other words, you can come and go as you please. We all know that borders have two sides, and in order to cross any border, you have to satisfy the requirements of both jurisdictions. And while exit requirements vary, and they're generally frowned upon by the international community as an obvious violation of our natural human right to the freedom of movement, they exist, and, sadly, I predict they're going to get much, much worse. As far as entry requirements go, as most of you have no doubt experienced coming here, if you don't have legal residency in your destination country, then you have to qualify for some type of visa in order to get in. And you may not be aware of this, but border guards can deny your access as a tourist for completely subjective reasons. It's written into the law of almost every country, and it happens all the time. Additionally, travel rules can change very quickly in the face of a global panic, whether that be caused by an infectious disease or perhaps a war, which seems to be next. These days, one imagines the rules could change in order to impose an international system of social credit, or, perhaps more likely, to achieve some sort of environmentally aligned goal. The last time these rules were strongly enforced, during the COVID panic, special consideration was made in many places for foreigners to return to their country of residency, provided they did so expeditiously and without raising too much of a fuss. And so having residency in more than one country is a protection. It's insurance against losing your freedom of movement at the very moment you might need it the most. Actually getting residency in a second country is pretty easy. In El Salvador, it's easier than most. You can apply as a business owner, a digital nomad, a retiree, a student, a missionary, an athlete, a spokesperson, and of course, as an investor in our not quite fully announced but already world-famous volcano bonds. Including them, there are 17 different pathways to residency here, so there is a program that is right for everyone. You might be thinking, that sounds pretty good. Sign me up. What do I need to get started? It's pretty easy. You need your passport, of course, and it needs to have at least 6 months of validity remaining at the time you file your application. And then adults need a background check and children need a birth certificate. And both of these documents must be legalized, in other words, apostilled or authenticated, depending on the country you come from. And then, in addition to those basic requirements, every program has its own specific guidelines, but they're what you might expect. If you're applying for a student visa, you'll have to show some school records and a letter of acceptance from an educational institution that you would like to attend. If you're applying as a missionary, you'll need a form from your church talking about what you want to do, how you're going to support yourself. It's all common sense, really. And the folks at immigration have done an incredible job of making the process easy and transparent. And they're very helpful if you have questions regarding your particular circumstance. And if residency is a single country multipass, then actually getting citizenship and a passport in El Salvador, it's like a 133 country multipass. Because that's the number of countries that you can travel easily as a Salvadoran without getting a formal visa. By the way, if you are a national of Spain or any Latin American country, you can get residency in El Salvador after only, you can get citizenship in El Salvador after only 1 year of residency. For everyone else, it's 5 years. So get the clock started. 133 countries. Sounds like a lot, but how does it actually stack up? They could be all the crap countries, right? Well, don't worry, I've done the hard work, and I have compared the Salvadoran passport to the typical North American or European passport, and here's what I found. If you consider only the countries that you are actually likely to visit, let's face it, most of them are the same. There are, of course, a few usual suspects that like to make life more difficult than it has to be, so let's call them out, go down the list so you know. You have Canada, the United States, Mexico, for obvious reasons, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. They all require Salvadorans to have a formal visa issued prior to travel, but fortunately all of those countries have embassies in San Salvador where you can go in person to apply before your trip. They all have online systems as well, but in my experience, nothing beats a face-to-face for getting a comprehensive answer to your travel questions from the experts who deal with them on a daily basis. 2 other countries you might find yourself wanting to visit: Australia, which requires an e-visa, and Thailand, which requires a formal visa. Unfortunately, neither of those countries have diplomatic offices here, but we have offices there that can help from the other side of the border. And they are located in Canberra, Melbourne, and Bangkok, respectively. It's worth noting at this point that there are places Salvadorans can travel more easily than our so-called developed counterparts, namely Iran, which requires an e-visa, and surprisingly, Turkey, Belarus, and the Russian Federation, which are all visa-free for tourism. You get 90 days. Now, I know that some of those might not be at the top of your list for potential destinations right now, but provided we don't all kill each other in the next few days and months and years, you'll admit that they represent a significant chunk of the planet that's otherwise difficult for Westerners to access. And of particular note to many Bitcoiners, you get a longer stay than usual. In the United Arab Emirates, you get 90 days as opposed to the typical 30. So you don't have to rush that Abu Dhabi vacation. Okie dokie. So residency, citizenship, and a passport in El Salvador offer you many personal benefits as they relate to your freedom. And you may be asking, what about your economic concerns, right? Show me the money. That's important too. Well, I'm happy to report that in that regard, El Salvador shines like no other country. Because establishing a Salvadoran corporation in the new Bitcoin City Special Economic Zone is like a zero-tax life hack that lasts as long as you want it to. If you'd like to buy property here, you don't have to pay property tax. If you'd like to earn money here and around the world, there'll be no municipal fees on your businesses and no taxes on income. Want to hire people for your business and personal needs? There's no payroll tax. Your employees get to keep 100% of their wages. I don't know about you, but to me, that's what fair trade actually looks like. And after you have operated your business and you've been successful and you've earned a lot of money, and importantly, you've been able to keep more of your money as compared with every other tax jurisdiction on the planet, because it's hard to beat zero, right? You'll want to domicile that wealth and use it to make investments, get some returns. Well, you won't have to pay any capital gains tax. And I'm not just talking about Bitcoin, I mean all of it. And then down the road, when you are ready to pass that wealth on to the next generation, there are no estate taxes. Basically, you're just paying VAT. Imagine how simple life could be. Now, many of these benefits are available to you right now. You don't have to wait. That whole zero tax on property thing, that's nationwide. El Salvador is one of the only countries in the world to actually do that. And somewhat uniquely, we have a territorial tax system, which means that the money you derive from sources abroad has zero tax liability. Let that sink in for a minute, because I know that many of you here are digital nomads or remote workers. So if you fit in that description and you are not a tax resident of El Salvador, I have bad news for you. You're doing it wrong, because you're paying money you don't have to pay for taxes that you shouldn't owe, and you could be stacking sats. I know you would rather be doing that, especially right now. Now, the other benefits that I talked about, like the payroll tax, those are specific to the Bitcoin City. And it's true that Bitcoin City won't be built overnight. But the little secret is that we've already started, which means there's plenty for you to do. There's a world of opportunity if you want to get involved. It's why I'm here. It's why I've convinced my family to move permanently to El Salvador. It's a bit of a selfish reason, actually, if we're being completely honest. I have this burning need to be on the bleeding edge of Bitcoin's journey to global supremacy as a store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. I want to see it all. I want to network with all of these innovative, Bitcoin-oriented leaders and entrepreneurs who are investing here aggressively. I want to participate in all of the startups that have chosen El Salvador as their base of operations. I want to support them. I want to see them be successful. And perhaps most importantly, I want to know that every day when I wake up, that my efforts advance the cause of freedom, not just in this country, but here in El Salvador, we set an example for the world. Believe me when I tell you that that type of knowledge helps you sleep very well at night. And then, hopefully years from now, when it's all said and done, what I'd really like to have is a great story to tell my grandchildren, and if I'm so lucky, my great-grandchildren. That's what I want. And if that's what you want, you can have it too. It's far easier and more accessible than you might have imagined, and you can do it full-time, part-time, or virtually. If you would like more information, you should visit the official government website, migration.gov.sv. All of the information that you need is there. I would also encourage you to reach out to the local community of expats, many of whom are in this room today. I am confident that I speak for all of us when I say we'd be thrilled to have you, happy to help you get set up, established, navigate the system. And obviously, I wouldn't be on the stage personally unless I also wanted to help you escape to El Salvador. Now, I'd like to wrap up, and I'm going to go over time a little bit. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. Oh, I can roll with it? Good. I would like to leave you with one request. I've tried to lay out as best I can some of the problems that I think we're about to face as a global community and you personally. I've done my best to position El Salvador as a potential solution for you and your family. But if you're not completely convinced, and I don't blame you, it's a big decision to make, moving to another country, or at least part-time. What I'd like for you to do is this. First of all, enjoy the conference. It's been a great first day, and tomorrow is going to be excellent as well. And then after that, you'll have a chance to let down your hair a little bit and relax and explore some of the country. Obviously, you're going to the beach, and I hope you enjoy that. But you also have the opportunity to explore the rest of the country. You can go see the volcanoes, the archaeological ruins. You can go out to the east to see where Bitcoin City is going to actually be built. You can go on the Rutas de las Flores, very beautiful. And while you're out there being overwhelmed by all of the natural beauty in this country, while you are taking in the sights and mingling with your fellow Bitcoiners, locals and tourists, the people who share your values, your passions, your ideals, the people who see the world the same way that you do, it's infectious, it's contagious. What I'd like for you to do is to consider in the back of your mind, just imagine, really visualize what it would be like if you took that leap of faith and made this beautiful and optimistic country full of incredibly friendly and kind people, hardworking people, your new home as well. Thank you very much, everybody.